Morning to you, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Desiree.
You've decided to abandon the legal or the court action against the sale of cigarettes. Take us through some of your considerations when making this decision.
Thank you very much, Des. Thank you very much, Desiree, for that. You correctly pointed out that on 30th of April we wrote to the government, and that was a letter of demand, basically seeking clarity on how the decision to reverse the lift on the ban of tobacco products was arrived at. And on the basis of that, we gave government a time up until Monday, the 4th of May, for them to respond to our inquiry. I can confirm to you that we did receive the confirmation, the letter from government responding to us, and we read that in connection with the letter that the president also released on Monday in his newsletter, where it detailed very elaborate steps in terms of how the decision-making process in government was made. And on the basis of that, we decided that at this stage, we will not pursue that option that is available to us to go to court on this matter, but rather we thought that this provided us an opportunity for us to work with government, given what the president said sounded like an invitation where it says that government is willing to work with civil society, with government, with all other interested parties to make sure that the implementation of the regulations is a success, and that this is a learning process for all of us. And we thought if that is an opportunity that is open to us, we were willing to actually welcome that opportunity and take that steps, because for us litigation would be a last resort.
In your statement, you mentioned another statement by the Commissioner of SARS, Edward Kieswetter, where he says that SARS has clear evidence of that the illicit economy is thriving at this time. Is the black market boom a concern for you?
So, Desiree, from the first day of the lockdown on the 27th of March, we already raised this concern. In our first correspondence, we wrote a couple of letters to concerned government ministers in the National Command Council to raise this as a concern. In the main, we raised three concerns. We said the one was that our understanding of the lockdown regulations was the restriction of the movement of people to avoid them spreading the virus through them seeking cigarettes, which could not be sold at that stage. And we said if they are not able to buy them at the closest retail outlet closer to their home, they will then move from one outlet to the other, and therefore defeating the purpose of the lockdown regulation. That was number one that we raised as a concern. Number two was the one on the illicit trade, as you correctly point out. SARS is fully aware of this. I mean, we've been raising this concern for the past 2-3 years about the increase in illicit trade in cigarettes. And we also even mentioned what are some of the causes of the illicit trade. And at the onset of the lockdown, we said, this is now going to boom because these guys already have very, very robust distribution channels in the underground world. And now it will be just open season for them. And it comes as no surprise for us that, in subsequent communication to that, we've raised this issue consistently that the illicit trade in tobacco products is going to be rife. And these numbers that the commissioner had said more or less are consistent with what we know already to be the problem around the illicit trade in tobacco products.
British American Tobacco holds the lion's share of the South African cigarette production space at 78% of that. What have you got to say to your other colleagues who are continuing with their court action against the state in this regard?
If I could just clarify that, we are not in any way affiliated to FITA. We are not members of FITA. We belong to a value chain association called the South Africa Tobacco Transformation Alliance, and we are also the biggest, not just the biggest in terms of market size, but also in terms of our consumption of local leaf. So we have a very strong vested interest to finding a local solution. We're also very interested and invested in making sure that we protect the legal value chain from the tobacco growers, who are the farmers, the processors of tobacco, as well as further in the value chain with our distributors and retailers. So for us, as I indicated, that having assessed government's response and taking into consideration who is so dependent in this value chain, for us at this stage, we believe in the interests of all our value chain, we need to engage further with government to find a common solution. Already, on the positive side, we can say that the farmers are now able to continue harvesting their crop. They are in high harvest season. They are also able to sell onward to the processors. The one stumbling block is just that we are not able to legally sell, which is then a huge problem for us, because that means all the other guys in the value chain, like the farmers and the processors, cannot sell onward to us and make livelihoods. That further impacts livelihoods in the value chain. About 30,000 people are impacted. So that is our concern right now, which is why we feel that before we can even proceed to the next step, which is litigation, can we just give engagement one more time so that we can be able to unlock the sale in cigarette products.
We can't deny that the process has been politicized, especially with the respondents that were mentioned in the court papers. Is British American Tobacco dabbling in politics?
Sorry, our connection is a bit bad there. We lost it for a bit. I just heard lost you at the process being politicized.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, if your company is getting involved in politics.
Absolutely not, which is why we want to work within the constraints of the regulations that are being promulgated, and hence even our letter was very categoric to say that we seek clarity specifically in relation to the interpretation of the regulations. And when we wrote that in terms of our understanding as to who is in charge of the process of the Disaster Management Act, and within those confines, that is how we addressed our concerns, that we would just like clarification that government outlined a process that had an alert system, and in that alert system, we had been included for a level 4 allowance to be able to sell our goods. And as far as I'm concerned, as a good corporate citizen, there was nothing untoward with that. It's a legitimate question that everybody can ask, in terms of we don't seem to understand why initially we were included and now we're excluded. I think everybody can agree that that is a legitimate question to ask, that on what basis were we excluded from this process, and what is it that we need to do further down to be actually included in the different levels of the lockdown.
Thanks again for talking to us this morning. Johnny Moloto is the Head of External Affairs at the British American Tobacco South Africa.